This narration is a transformative adaptation based on the novel Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. All rights to the original characters, plotline, and source material belong to the original author and publishers. This is created for narration, educational review, and entertainment purposes. In the year AF 632, the world had finally achieved true utopia, a society where every individual was genetically engineered and conditioned to be happy, to conform, and to never question the authority of the world state. The once blue skies were now a permanent gray, a reminder of the trade-off between freedom and stability. The air was thick with the hum of machinery, a constant presence that underscored the omnipotence of the ruling class. In this brave new world, the concept of family had been eradicated, replaced by a rigid social hierarchy that dictated every aspect of a person's life. From the moment of conception, embryos were carefully sorted and conditioned to fit into one of 5 castes: alpha, beta, gamma, delta, and epsilon. Each caste had its own distinct role in society, and individuals were bred to fulfill their designated function with unwavering loyalty and dedication. At the top of the hierarchy were the alphas, the ruling class, who possessed the highest intellectual and physical abilities. They were the leaders, the thinkers, and the decision-makers, responsible for guiding the world state towards ever greater heights of efficiency and productivity. The alphas were bred to be confident, charismatic, and strong-willed, with a natural aptitude for leadership and a deep understanding of the complexities of the world. Below the alphas were the betas, the middle managers, who oversaw the day-to-day operations of the world state. They were intelligent, capable, and diligent, but lacked the vision and charisma of their alpha counterparts. The betas were the backbone of society, ensuring that the wheels of the machine kept turning smoothly and efficiently. The gammas, deltas, and epsilons made up the lower castes, each with their own unique characteristics and roles. The gammas were the technicians and specialists, responsible for maintaining the intricate infrastructure of the world state. The deltas were the laborers, toiling in the factories and farms that kept the society running. And the epsilons, the lowest of the low, were the menial workers, performing the most mundane and degrading tasks with a dull, uncomplaining resignation. Every individual, from the moment of birth, was conditioned to accept their designated role in society, to never question the authority of the world state, and to be content with their lot in life. The process of conditioning began in the womb, where embryos were subjected to a carefully calibrated regimen of chemicals and stimuli designed to shape their future personalities and abilities. After birth, the process continued, with infants and children being taught to conform to societal norms through a combination of hypnopedia, electroshock therapy, and carefully crafted propaganda. The world state controlled every aspect of its citizens' lives, from the moment they woke up in the morning to the moment they went to bed at night. People lived in vast, sprawling cities, their days filled with work, leisure, and consumption. They were encouraged to indulge in every whim, to pursue every pleasure, and to never deny themselves anything. The world state provided for all their needs, and in return they were expected to be loyal, obedient, and above all, happy. But happiness in this brave new world was a carefully constructed illusion. It was a state of being that was induced through a combination of genetic engineering, conditioning, and the ubiquitous presence of a powerful mood-altering drug called Soma. Soma was the ultimate panacea, a substance that could cure any ailment, calm any fear, and induce a state of deep, untroubled happiness. It was available to everyone, and its use was actively encouraged by the world state, which saw it as a means of maintaining social stability and preventing dissent. As the day wore on, the cities came alive with the hum of activity. People went about their daily routines, their faces expressionless, their eyes glazed over with a mixture of Soma-induced euphoria and conditioned conformity. They moved through the crowded streets, their footsteps echoing off the towering skyscrapers, their voices a constant, soothing murmur of contentment. In this sea of faces, it was impossible to discern individuality, to detect even the slightest hint of rebellion or discontent. The world state had created a society that was truly utopian, a society in which every individual was a cog in a vast, intricate machine, working together in perfect harmony to create a world that was efficient, productive, and above all, happy. But beneath the surface of this gleaming, high-tech society, a sense of unease lurked, a feeling that something was not quite right, that the price of happiness had been too high, and that the cost of conformity had been paid in full. In the depths of a hyper-efficient society, where every aspect of life was meticulously controlled and orchestrated, two individuals stood out as anomalies, their peculiarities a testament to the inherent complexities of human nature. Bernard Marx, an Alpha Plus, and Lenina Crowne, a young and stunning Beta, were about to embark on a journey that would challenge the very fabric of their existence. Their destination, a savage reservation, was a place where the inhabitants lived in a state of unbridled freedom, untainted by the all-pervasive surveillance and conditioning that governed their own world. Bernard, with his unconventional thoughts and unorthodox behavior, had always felt like an outcast among his peers. His physical appearance, somewhat shorter and thinner than the average alpha, had led to a lifetime of ridicule and social exclusion. As a result, he had developed a keen sense of observation, often finding solace in the company of books and ideas that deviated from the norm. His fascination with the past, with the ancient civilizations that had once thrived on Earth, was seen as a quirk, a nostalgic yearning for a bygone era. Yet, it was this very curiosity that drove him to seek out new experiences, to venture into the unknown, and to question the status quo. Lenina, on the other hand, was the epitome of modernity, a true product of the world state's conditioning. Her stunning beauty, coupled with her vivacious personality, had made her a popular figure among her peers. However, beneath her carefree exterior, Lenina harbored a deep-seated desire for excitement, for something that would shatter the monotony of her daily routine. Her decision to accompany Bernard on this trip was motivated by a sense of adventure, a longing to experience the thrill of the unknown. As they prepared to depart, Lenina's thoughts were filled with visions of the Savage Reservation, a place where the inhabitants lived in a state of primal freedom, unencumbered by the constraints of their own society. The Savage Reservation, a vast and arid expanse of land, was home to a diverse array of cultures, each with its own unique customs and traditions. It was a place where the rhythms of nature still held sway, where the cycles of birth, growth, and decay were an integral part of everyday life. The inhabitants of this land, the savages, were a mysterious and enigmatic people, their ways and beliefs shrouded in an aura of mystery. They lived in a world that was both familiar and yet utterly alien, a world that was governed by its own set of rules and principles. As Bernard and Lenina delved deeper into the heart of the reservation, they began to notice the subtle yet profound differences that set this world apart from their own. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and earth, the sky a deep shade of blue that seemed to vibrate with an otherworldly energy. The landscape itself was a testament to the unfettered power of nature, with its rugged mountains, its vast expanses of desert, and its shimmering lakes. Every rock, every tree, every blade of grass seemed to hold a secret, a story that whispered tales of a long-forgotten past. Their journey was not without its challenges, however. The world state's all-pervasive surveillance system, with its network of hidden cameras and informants, had made it difficult for individuals to move freely, to explore the unknown without being detected. Bernard and Lenina had to be careful to avoid drawing attention to themselves, lest they be reported to the authorities and forced to undergo a process of reconditioning. The threat of punishment, of being forced to conform to the norms of their society, hung over them like a sword of Damocles, a constant reminder of the dangers of nonconformity. As they navigated the uncharted terrain of the Savage Reservation, Bernard and Lenina found themselves confronting their own prejudices, their own deeply ingrained assumptions about the world. They had been taught to view the savages as primitives, as uncivilized beings who were incapable of experiencing the same range of emotions, the same depth of feeling, as their own kind. Yet, as they encountered the inhabitants of this land, they began to realize that their preconceptions were misguided, that the savages were, in fact, complex and multifaceted individuals with their own unique culture and traditions. The encounter with the savages marked a turning point in their journey, a moment of reckoning that forced them to confront the very foundations of their own society. They had been taught to believe in the superiority of their own world, in the infallibility of the world state's ideology. Yet, as they witnessed the beauty and the simplicity of the savages' way of life, they began to question the values that had been instilled in them, to wonder if there was more to life than the endless pursuit of pleasure and consumption. In this strange and unfamiliar world, Bernard and Lenina found themselves on a precipice, poised between two vastly different realities. They had caught a glimpse of a life that was raw, unbridled, and authentic, a life that was untainted by the artificial constructs of their own society. As they stood at the threshold of this new world, they knew that they could never go back to their old lives, that they had been forever changed by their encounter with the savages. The experience had awakened something deep within them, a sense of wonder, a sense of awe, and a sense of curiosity that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. As they stepped off the plain, the dry, scorching air enveloped them, a stark contrast to the humid, climate-controlled environment they had left behind. The Savage Reservation stretched out before them, a vast expanse of untamed wilderness, teeming with life and untouched by the sterilizing influence of the world state. Bernard and Lenina, clad in their immaculate white uniforms, stood out like beacons of modernity amidst the primitive landscape. The sky above was a deep, foreboding blue, with clouds that seemed to swirl and twist in every direction. The air was alive with the songs of birds and the rustling of leaves, a cacophony of sounds that was both familiar and yet utterly alien. As they made their way through the reservation, the terrain shifted and undulated, like a living, breathing entity. The ground beneath their feet was dry and cracked, parched from the relentless sun that beat down upon it. Their guide, a gruff, weathered man with a face like worn leather, led them through the winding paths and narrow canyons, pointing out various landmarks and features along the way. Bernard and Lenina followed closely, their eyes drinking in the unfamiliar sights and sounds. They had been warned about the savages, told of their primitive ways and unsanitary conditions, but nothing could have prepared them for the reality of it all. As they walked, the silence between them grew thicker, like a palpable presence that hung in the air. Bernard's eyes were wide with wonder, his mind reeling from the sheer magnitude of what they were seeing. Lenina, on the other hand, seemed more subdued, her expression a mixture of fascination and revulsion.
She had been conditioned to view the savages as inferior, as less than human, and yet, as she gazed upon their rough-hewn faces and unkempt hair, she couldn't help but feel a twinge of curiosity.
The sun beat down upon them, relentless in its ferocity, as they approached the first village. The houses were small and crude, constructed from rough-hewn wood and thatched with dry grasses. Smoke drifted lazily from the chimneys, carrying the scent of burning wood and cooking meat. Bernard and Lenina exchanged a glance, their faces set with anticipation, as they followed their guide into the heart of the village. The savages themselves were a surprise, their faces a map of wrinkles and scars, their bodies lean and wiry from years of hard labor. They moved with a quiet confidence, their eyes gleaming with a fierce inner light as they went about their daily routines. Bernard and Lenina watched, transfixed, as a group of children played in the dust, their laughter and shouts carrying on the wind. An old woman, her face a labyrinth of lines and creases, sat cross-legged on the ground, her hands moving deftly as she wove a basket from thin strips of wood. The air was thick with the smells of cooking and smoke, of sweat and earth. Bernard and Lenina breathed deeply, their senses overwhelmed by the sheer intensity of it all.
They had never experienced anything like this before, never been exposed to such raw, unbridled humanity. It was both exhilarating and terrifying, like standing on the edge of a precipice, staring into the unknown.
As they walked through the village, they began to notice the strange, ritualistic artifacts that adorned the houses and the people themselves. Feathers and beads, bones and stones, all manner of objects that seemed to hold deep significance for the savages. Bernard's eyes lit upon a small, delicate necklace, fashioned from a series of tiny, polished stones. He reached out a hand, his fingers brushing against the smooth surface, and felt a sudden jolt of connection, as if the very essence of the savage's world had been distilled into this small, exquisite object. Lenina, on the other hand, seemed more interested in the people themselves, her eyes roving over the faces and bodies, drinking in the details of their primitive existence. She watched, fascinated as a young woman, her hair long and wild, her eyes flashing with a fierce inner light, worked at a loom, weaving an intricate pattern from threads of colored wool. As the day wore on, Bernard and Lenina found themselves drawn deeper into the heart of the village, their initial trepidation giving way to a growing sense of wonder and awe. They had never felt so alive, so connected to the world around them. The savages, with their primitive ways and unsanitary conditions, had somehow managed to tap into a deep, primal wellspring of humanity, a sense of community and belonging that was utterly foreign to the world state. And yet, as the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the village, Bernard and Lenina couldn't shake the feeling that they were somehow outsiders, observers in a world that was not their own. They had caught a glimpse of something primal and raw, something that spoke to a deep, unfulfilled longing within themselves. As they prepared to leave, the savages gathering around them, their faces set with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion, Bernard and Lenina knew that they would never forget this experience, this journey into the heart of the Savage Reservation. In the scorching desert landscape of New Mexico, where the worn adobe buildings stood as testaments to a bygone era, A chance encounter would alter the course of destiny for two inhabitants of the world state. Bernard Marx, an alpha plus with a penchant for individuality, and Lenina Crowne, a young and beautiful beta, had embarked on a journey to the Savage Reservation, a place where the primitive and the civilized coexisted in an uneasy harmony. As they ventured deeper into the reservation, the desolate beauty of the desert stretched out before them, a seemingly endless expanse of rust-red sand and jagged rock formations. The air was alive with the sweet, melancholic songs of the reservation's inhabitants, their voices carried on the wind like the whispers of a forgotten past. It was here, amidst the crumbling ruins of a long-abandoned culture, that they stumbled upon a young man, his eyes burning with an inner fire that seemed to defy the very fabric of the world state. His name was John, the son of a woman who had been left behind by the world state, a relic of a bygone era who had been forgotten in the relentless march of progress. As Bernard and Lenina approached him, they were struck by the intensity of his gaze, a piercing blue that seemed to bore into their very souls. His features were strong, chiseled, and yet there was something vulnerable about him, a sense of fragility that belied the fierce passion that burned within. As they conversed with John, they began to grasp the full extent of his unique perspective on the world. Raised in isolation, without the benefit of the world state's conditioning and indoctrination, John's mind was a maelstrom of conflicting emotions, a battleground where the primal and the civilized clashed in a struggle for dominance. He was both fascinated and repelled by the civilized world of the world state, drawn to its promise of comfort and security, yet horrified by its emptiness and superficiality. John's words were like a breath of fresh air, a gust of wind that swept away the stagnant conventions of the world state, revealing the sterile landscape that lay beneath. He spoke of Shakespeare and the Bible, of poetry and passion, of love and loss, his voice weaving a spell that entranced and unsettled Bernard and Lenina in equal measure. As they listened, they began to see the world through his eyes, a world that was both familiar and yet utterly alien, a world where the boundaries between reality and fantasy were blurred, and the very notion of truth was called into question. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the desert landscape, Bernard and Lenina found themselves increasingly enthralled by John's presence. They were drawn to his intensity, his passion, his unbridled emotion, like moths to a flame. And yet, as they gazed deeper into his eyes, they saw something there that gave them pause, a sense of depth, of complexity, of uncharted emotions that threatened to upend the carefully constructed world they had known. The world state, with its rigid castes and its predestined roles, its endless pleasures and its carefully calibrated distractions, seemed pale and insipid in comparison to the rich, vibrant tapestry of John's inner world. As they prepared to leave, Bernard and Lenina couldn't help but feel a sense of unease, a sense of disquiet that lingered long after they had bid John farewell. They had caught a glimpse of a world beyond the boundaries of their own, a world that was both captivating and terrifying, a world that threatened to disrupt the delicate balance of their own existence. As they flew back to their world, the landscape unfolding below them like a map, Bernard and Lenina couldn't shake the feeling that they had left something behind, something precious and irretrievable. They had discovered a new world, a world that existed beyond the confines of their own, a world that was both beautiful and brutal, a world that would haunt them for the rest of their days. The encounter with John had awakened something within them, a sense of wonder, of awe, of trepidation, a sense that the world was not always as it seemed, that there were depths and complexities that lay beyond the reach of their mundane, everyday lives. The memory of John's eyes, burning with an inner fire, would stay with them, a reminder of the mysteries that lay beyond the boundaries of their world, a world that was both fascinating and terrifying, a world that would continue to haunt them, like a ghostly presence, long after they had returned to the familiar comforts of their own reality. The discovery of John had opened a door that led to a new world, a world of possibilities and terrors, a world that would challenge everything they thought they knew about themselves and their place in the universe. In the sterile, silver-lined corridors of the world state, a stranger walked among the crowds, his eyes drinking in the wonders of a society that had long since forgotten the meaning of wonder. John, the savage, fresh from the dusty, sun-scorched landscapes of the reservation, found himself lost in a sea of faces that seemed to blend together in a blur of identical, expressionless masks. The air was thick with the hum of machinery, the soft whir of helicopters, and the incessant, pulsing rhythm of the city's heartbeat. As he walked, the skyscrapers loomed above him, their peaks shrouded in a mist of haze and smoke, their walls a dizzying maze of windows that glinted like 1,000 tiny mirrors in the pale, artificial light. The streets were a tapestry of colors, a kaleidoscope of sounds and smells that assaulted his senses and left him reeling. The scent of food, a cacophony of sweet and savory aromas, wafted through the air, enticing and repelling him in equal measure. The distant thrum of music, a relentless, pounding beat, seemed to seep from the very pores of the city itself, a constant reminder of the world state's relentless pursuit of pleasure. Every step revealed a new marvel, a new wonder that left John's mind reeling in awe. The people, the buildings, the very fabric of society itself seemed to be woven from a thread of pure, unadulterated luxury. Everywhere he looked, he saw the trappings of a civilization that had transcended the mundane, the ordinary, and had entered a realm of pure, unadulterated excess. The streets were filled with strange, sleek vehicles that moved without the aid of horses or oxen, their soft whir and hum a gentle accompaniment to the city's symphony. The people themselves seemed to be crafted from a different mold, their faces smooth, unlined and ageless, their bodies toned, tanned, and perfectly proportioned. And yet, despite the wonders that surrounded him, John couldn't shake the feeling of disquiet that had begun to gnaw at his soul. Everywhere he looked, he saw the superficial, the shallow, and the mundane. The people, with their perfect faces and perfect bodies, seemed to be lacking in some fundamental, essential way. They were like dolls, like puppets, like creatures crafted from some inferior, artificial material that lacked the warmth, the depth, and the richness of human experience. Their laughter was too loud, their smiles too wide, their eyes too empty. They seemed to be living in a world of their own creation, a world that was devoid of passion, of fire, of life itself. As he walked, the crowds grew thicker, the noise more intense, and the smells more overpowering. John felt like a small boat adrift in a stormy sea, tossed about by waves of sound and color that threatened to engulf him at every turn. He clung to the solid, unshakable core of his own identity, the rock of his own values and beliefs, as the world state's relentless tide of luxury and excess crashed against him. The buildings seemed to loom closer, the skyscrapers towering above him like giants, their peaks hidden in the mist. The streets were a labyrinth, a maze of twisting corridors and dark alleys that seemed to shift and change with every step. Despite the initial wonder, the initial awe, John couldn't help but feel a growing sense of disillusionment. The world state, with its perfect people and its perfect society, seemed to be lacking in some fundamental, essential way. It was a society that had sacrificed its soul, its heart, and its very humanity on the altar of luxury and excess. The people, with their perfect faces and their perfect bodies, seemed to be nothing more than puppets, dolls, or automatons, crafted from some inferior, artificial material that lacked the warmth, the depth, and the richness of human experience. As the day wore on, John found himself drawn to the outskirts of the city, to the strange, half-forgotten places that seemed to exist on the fringes of the world-state's consciousness. He walked through parks and gardens where the flowers were perfectly manicured, the grass was perfectly cut, and the trees were perfectly pruned. He saw the strange, artificial lakes where the water was perfectly still, the swans were perfectly white, and the sky was perfectly blue. Everywhere he looked, he saw the same relentless pursuit of perfection, the same endless quest for luxury and excess. And yet, despite the perfection, despite the luxury, John couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness, of hollowness that seemed to haunt the world state's every step. The people, the buildings, the very fabric of society itself seemed to be crafted from a material that was fundamentally, essentially flawed. It was a society that had sacrificed its soul, its heart, and its very humanity on the altar of luxury and excess. A society that had forgotten the meaning of wonder, the meaning of awe, and the meaning of life itself. As the sun began to set, casting a pale, golden light over the city, John found himself standing on the edge of a great precipice, staring out into a void that seemed to stretch out before him like an endless, bottomless chasm. The world state, with its perfect people and its perfect society, seemed to be nothing more than a thin, fragile veneer, a delicate, artificial shell that threatened to shatter, to fragment, and to disintegrate at the slightest touch. And John, the savage, with his rough, unpolished exterior and his deep, unshakable core, seemed to be the only one who could see the truth, the only one who could hear the whisper of the void that seemed to echo through the city streets like a haunting, mournful sigh. In the sterile, efficient world of the world state, where every aspect of life was meticulously controlled and conditioned, John's presence was a jarring anomaly. His introduction to this society, with its rigid castes and pharmacologically induced happiness, had been a rude awakening, a slap in the face that shattered the complacent tranquility of the inhabitants. As he navigated the labyrinthine corridors of the world state's bureaucratic machinery, John's innate sense of morality and his exposure to the raw, unbridled emotions of Shakespeare's works created an unbridgeable chasm between him and the people around him. The more he learned about this supposedly utopian society, the more he became disillusioned with its values, which seemed to prioritize pleasure and consumption above all else. The world state's citizens, with their vacant, drug-induced smiles and their obsessive pursuit of instant gratification, struck John as hollow, soulless creatures, devoid of genuine passion or deep-seated emotions. He felt like a wildflower blooming in a garden of genetically engineered, uniform blooms, his uniqueness a threat to the very fabric of this tightly controlled world. As John struggled to come to terms with the stark realities of the world state, the tensions between him and the authorities began to escalate. His refusal to conform to the societal norms, his rejection of the ubiquitous Soma, and his penchant for solitude and introspection made him an outcast, a misfit in a world where individuality was discouraged, and independent thought was seen as a threat to the established order.
The world controllers, with their cold, calculating logic and their unwavering commitment to the stability of the world state, viewed John as a potential disruptor, a rogue element that needed to be contained and neutralized.
The moral dilemmas that John faced as he tried to navigate his place in this alien world were daunting and complex. On one hand, he was drawn to the world state's promises of comfort, security, and pleasure, temptations that appealed to his baser instincts and his deep-seated desire for human connection. On the other hand, he was repelled by the emptiness and superficiality of the society, the lack of genuine emotions, and the suffocating grip of the world controllers. As he grappled with these conflicting desires, John found himself torn between his loyalty to his own values and his desire to belong, to be accepted by the people around him.
The streets of London, with their towering skyscrapers and their endless streams of pedestrians, seemed to stretch out before John like a labyrinth, a maze of reflections and echoes that threatened to consume him. The faces that passed him by were masks hiding the true thoughts and feelings of the individuals behind them, and John felt like a ghost, invisible and insignificant as he wandered through the crowds.
The distant hum of the city, the constant din of music and advertisements, created a sense of disorientation, a feeling of being lost in a sea of noise and distractions. As the days turned into weeks, John's sense of disconnection and isolation deepened. He felt like a stranger in a strange land, a world that was both fascinating and repellent, a place where the boundaries between reality and illusion were constantly blurred.
The world state's propaganda machine, with its cleverly crafted slogans and its sophisticated manipulation of public opinion, seemed to be always one step ahead of him, anticipating his every move and countering his every argument.
The more he learned about this society, the more he realized that he was trapped in a hall of mirrors, where reflections of reflections created an infinite regress of deceit and illusion.
In this desolate, post-human landscape, John's emotions were a liability, a threat to the stability of the world state and its carefully calibrated machinery. His capacity for love, his ability to feel deeply and intensely, made him vulnerable, a target for the world controllers and their agents of socialization.
As he struggled to maintain his individuality, his sense of self, in a world that sought to erase all distinctions and all differences, John realized that he was fighting a losing battle, a battle against the tide of history and the inexorable forces of progress.
The silence of the night, the stillness of the darkness, seemed to be the only time when John could hear his own thoughts, when he could reflect on his experiences and his emotions without the constant distractions of the world state's propaganda machine.
In these moments of solitude, he felt a sense of connection to the natural world, to the earth and the sky, that he had never experienced before. The stars above, the trees and the flowers seemed to be the only things that remained unchanged, the only constants in a world that was constantly in flux. As the darkness deepened, John's thoughts turned to Lenina, the young woman who had been assigned to him as his guide and companion. Her beauty, her charm, and her unwavering commitment to the world state's values had initially captivated him. But as he got to know her better, he realized that she was a product of the same system that he rejected, a system that had conditioned her to prioritize pleasure and consumption above all else. Their relationship, which had started as a tentative exploration of each other's thoughts and feelings, had become increasingly complicated, a tangled web of emotions and desires that threatened to consume them both.
In the end, it was John's desire for freedom, his need for autonomy and self-expression, that would prove to be his undoing. The world state, with its rigid controls and its suffocating grip on individuality, could not tolerate his presence, his refusal to conform to its norms and values.
As the tensions between John and the authorities reached a boiling point, the consequences of his newfound freedom became clear. He would have to choose between his loyalty to himself and his loyalty to the world state, between his desire for autonomy and his desire for acceptance. The fate that awaited him was uncertain, a future that was both terrifying and exhilarating, a future that would be shaped by his own choices and his own desires. In the depths of a society where conformity was the ultimate virtue, a spark of dissent had been ignited. John's words, like a whispered promise of liberation, had begun to spread, weaving a subtle yet potent spell that threatened to upend the very foundations of the world state. The sterile, efficient streets of London, once a testament to the triumph of rationality and control, now seethed with a newfound sense of unease, as if the carefully constructed facade of harmony was beginning to crack and crumble. As the days passed, the whisperings of discontent grew louder, coalescing into a murmuration of discontent that echoed through the city's towering skyscrapers and neon-drenched thoroughfares. It was a gentle hum at first, a soft buzzing that seemed to emanate from the very fabric of the metropolis itself, but it quickly swelled into a cacophony of protests and demonstrations, as citizens, emboldened by John's message of individual freedom, began to question the authority of the world state. The once omnipotent controllers, those paragons of wisdom and benevolence, now found themselves facing a crisis of unprecedented proportions. Their carefully calibrated machinery of social control, honed to perfection over centuries, was beginning to falter, as the meticulously engineered populace, once a testament to their ingenuity, began to assert its own desires and aspirations. The streets, once a sterile and efficient thoroughfare, were now a battleground, as the forces of conformity clashed with the burgeoning tide of dissent. Through the winding alleys and cramped, labyrinthine corridors of the city, a sense of expectation hung in the air, like the promise of a summer storm. The crowds, a kaleidoscope of faces, each one a unique and intricate puzzle piece, seemed to vibrate with an almost palpable energy, as if the very act of gathering, of congregating in defiance of the world state's dictates, was enough to imbue them with a sense of purpose and belonging. And at the heart of this maelstrom, John, the enigmatic and troubled savage, stood as a beacon of hope, his words like a clarion call, ringing out across the city, a paean to the beauty and majesty of individuality. His was a message that resonated deep within the hearts of those who heard it, a reminder that, despite the world state's claims of perfection, there existed a profound and unbridgeable chasm between the sterile, efficient world of the controllers and the raw, unbridled beauty of the human experience. As the rebellion gained momentum, the world state's response grew increasingly draconian. The streets were filled with the ominous, black-clad figures of the police, their eyes hidden behind masks of impassive, mechanical indifference, as they sought to quell the uprising with an iron fist. The air was thick with the acrid smell of tear gas and smoke, the distant thrum of helicopters, and the anguished cries of the wounded as the city descended into chaos. And yet, despite the world state's best efforts to maintain control, the tide of dissent continued to rise, as if the very act of resistance had become a self-sustaining, organic entity, driven by a deep-seated desire for autonomy and self-expression. It was as if the populace, once a docile and complacent herd, had finally awakened to the realization that their existence was not, in fact, a mere simulacrum of life, but a vibrant, pulsing tapestry of experiences, each one unique and precious. In the midst of this turmoil, John's figure loomed large, a symbol of the rebellion, and a reminder that, even in the darkest depths of a society engineered to eliminate individuality, there existed a spark of defiance, a flame of resistance that could never truly be extinguished. His was a message that spoke directly to the heart, a call to arms that awakened a deep sense of purpose and belonging, as if the very act of hearing his words was enough to transform the listener, to imbue them with a sense of self, of identity, that the world state had long sought to eradicate. As the night wore on, the city became a battleground. The skyscrapers and streets, once a testament to the world state's power and efficiency, now a maze of shadows and secrets, as the rebels, emboldened by John's message, sought to claim the city as their own. The air was alive with the hum of helicopters, the flash of searchlights, and the distant rumble of thunder, as if the very fabric of reality was beginning to unravel, and the world, once a carefully constructed illusion, was finally beginning to reveal its true, unvarnished face. In this maelstrom of chaos and confusion, one thing was clear. The world state's grip on society was beginning to slip, and the future, once a carefully calibrated, predictable entity, had become a vast, uncharted expanse, full of possibilities and uncertainties. The rebellion, sparked by John's words, had become a force of nature, unstoppable and uncontainable, a testament to the power of individual freedom and the human spirit's enduring capacity for resistance and defiance. As the city burned and the world state's authority began to crumble, one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. In the desolate aftermath of the rebellion, the world state's machinery hummed back to life, its gears clicking into place with calculated precision. The streets, once filled with the fervent cries of freedom, were now empty and still, as if the very memory of dissent had been erased. The silence was oppressive, a heavy blanket that suffocated the city, choking the last vestiges of hope from the air. As the days passed, the authorities worked tirelessly to restore order, their efforts a testament to the world state's unwavering commitment to stability and control. The media, that most potent of tools, was once again deployed to shape public opinion, to distract and to deceive. The rebellion, it was said, had been a minor aberration, a fleeting moment of madness in an otherwise perfectly functioning society. The people, reassured by the familiar rhythms of their daily lives, began to forget the brief, shining moment of defiance, their minds clouded by the comforting haze of Soma and entertainment. But for John, the consequences of his actions were all too real. The young savage, who had once known only the simplicity and beauty of life on the reservation, was now forced to confront the harsh realities of the world state's wrath. His rebellion, his attempt to awaken the sleeping masses, had failed. The cost of his failure was high, the weight of his responsibility crushing. He was left to ponder the ruins of his dreams, the shattered remnants of a vision that had once seemed so pure, so untainted by the cynicism and corruption of the world.
In the cold, sterile confines of his cell, John was left to reflect on the true nature of the society he had sought to change. A society that valued stability and conformity above all else, that prized the smooth functioning of its machinery above the messy, unpredictable business of human emotions. A society that had sacrificed its very soul in the pursuit of efficiency and control, that had traded the beauty and complexity of human experience for the dull, gray comfort of a perfectly ordered world.
As he sat in the darkness, surrounded by the faint hum of the cell's life support systems, John couldn't help but wonder if he had been foolish to think that things could be different. Had he been naive to believe that the people, given the chance, would choose freedom over the comfortable shackles of their conditioning? The world state, it seemed, had been right all along. Humanity, left to its own devices, was a messy, imperfect thing. It was better, safer to let the experts guide and direct, to let the machinery of the state grind on, unimpeded by the whims and fancies of individual desire.
And yet, even as he faced the bleakness of his own defeat, John couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more, something that lay beyond the narrow horizons of the world state's all-encompassing control. A spark of defiance, a flame of resistance that burned deep within him, refusing to be extinguished. It was a spark that had been fanned into life by his reading of the old books, by the words of Shakespeare and the other giants of literature, who had spoken of a world that was raw and beautiful and imperfect. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, John's thoughts turned increasingly to the nature of humanity, to the question of what it meant to be alive. In a world that prized efficiency and control above all else, what space was left for the messy, imperfect business of human emotions? What room was there for love, for passion, for the simple, unadulterated joy of being alive? The world state, it seemed, had no answer to these questions, or rather, its answer was a resounding none. Humanity, in its view, was a thing to be managed, to be controlled, to be reduced to a set of predictable, programmable responses.
But John knew that this was a lie. He knew that humanity was more than just a collection of conditioned responses, more than just a set of predictable, programmed reactions. He knew that it was a complex, messy, beautiful thing, full of contradictions and paradoxes, full of light and darkness, full of hope and despair. And it was this knowledge, this understanding, that gave him the strength to carry on, even in the face of overwhelming defeat.
For in the end, it was not the world state's machinery that would ultimately prevail, but the human spirit, that spark of defiance and resistance that burned deep within the heart of every individual. It was a spark that could be fanned into a flame that could illuminate even the darkest of worlds, a flame that could guide humanity towards a brighter, more uncertain future. And it was this flame, this spark of hope, that John clung to even as the darkness closed in around him, a beacon of light in a world that had forgotten the beauty and complexity of human experience. In the end, it was not the revolution that had been expected, but a quiet, unassuming surrender. The forces of conformity, so meticulously crafted by the world state, had ultimately prevailed. John, the outsider, the rebel, the embodiment of humanity's deepest longings, had been consumed by the very system he had sought to challenge. His tragic demise served as a stark reminder of the world state's unwavering commitment to its principles of pleasure, consumption, and social control. As the days passed, the memory of John's defiance began to fade, replaced by the comforting familiarity of routine and predictability. The citizens of the world state, once again, found solace in their somas, their feelies, and their endless distractions. The director, confident in the stability of his regime, smiled knowingly, his eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of a job well done. The wheels of the world state's machinery continued to turn, smoothly, efficiently, and without interruption. And yet, amidst this sea of tranquility, a sense of disquiet lingered, a feeling that something essential, something fundamental to the human experience had been lost. It was as if the world state's relentless pursuit of happiness had come at a terrible cost, a cost that could never be fully reckoned. The price of freedom, of autonomy, of the very soul itself. For in a world where people were genetically engineered, conditioned, and pharmacologically manipulated to be happy, what room was left for genuine emotion, for passion, for love? In the sterile, efficient world of the world state, the concept of family had been all but eradicated. The traditional bonds of relationships, once forged through shared experiences, struggles, and triumphs, had been replaced by a fleeting, superficial connection. People were no longer born but manufactured, decanted, and conditioned to fulfill specific roles. The notion of a mother, a father, a child, had been reduced to a distant, quaint memory, a relic of a bygone era. The world state's obsession with pleasure, with instant gratification, had led to a society devoid of depth, of meaning, of purpose. The citizens of this brave new world were content to drift through life, untroubled by the burdens of thought, of reflection, of self-awareness. They were a population of sleepwalkers, numb to the world around them, incapable of experiencing the full range of human emotions. Their lives were a never-ending cycle of consumption, of acquisition, of discard and renewal. In this dystopian landscape, the figure of John stood as a poignant reminder of what had been lost. His story, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit, served as a warning, a clarion call to awaken from the slumber of indifference. For in a world that had abandoned its connection to the natural, to the emotional, to the irrational, John's presence had been a jarring, dissonant note, a note that had threatened to shatter the fragile, artificial harmony of the world state. As we gaze upon this brave new world, we are forced to confront the darker aspects of our own society, the ways in which we, too, have succumbed to the allure of pleasure, of convenience, of instant gratification, the manner in which we have surrendered our autonomy, our freedom, to the whims of technology, of consumerism, of the state. We are reminded that the price of our happiness, of our security, is often paid in the currency of our humanity. In the end, it is not the world state's efficiency, its productivity, or its apparent utopia that we should fear, but its emptiness, its hollowness, its lack of soul. For in a world that has lost touch with its own emotions, its own passions, its own heart, we are left with an existence that is barely worth living. An existence that is, in the words of John, not worth living, if one has not the freedom to live it as one chooses. The memory of John, of his struggles, of his triumphs, and of his ultimate defeat, will continue to haunt us, a ghostly reminder of the choices we have made, of the paths we have chosen. It is a reminder that our own world, our own society, is not so different from the world state, that we, too, are capable of creating a dystopia, a nightmare from which we may never awaken. But it is also a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit, to the unquenchable thirst for freedom, for autonomy, for life itself. As we close this chapter, this chronicle of a brave new world, we are left with a sense of unease, of disquiet, of uncertainty. We are forced to confront the possibility that our own world, our own future, may be shaped by the same forces that have created this dystopian landscape. But we are also reminded that it is not too late, that we still have the power to choose, to shape our own destiny, to forge our own path. The question is, Will we choose to follow the example of the world state, or will we forge a different road? A road that leads to a brighter, more humane, more compassionate future. The answer, much like the future itself, remains uncertain, a mystery waiting to be unraveled.